when we are witnesses. I think it's very important that we respect that rule. It just keeps everybody a little bit sharper, and I think it's the right way to run a meeting. So now I formally call this meeting to order, and welcome to meeting number 2 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application, as I am. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Given the ongoing pandemic situation and in light of the recommendations from health authorities as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October 19th, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, all those attending the meeting in person are to maintain 2-meter physical distancing, must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room, and it is highly recommended that the mask be worn at all times, including when seated. Must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the provided hand sanitizer at the room entrance. As the chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses participating virtually may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately, and we will ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming the proceedings. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind that the Board of Internal Economy's guidelines for mask use and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the proceedings and verification officer. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. A reminder that all comments by members should be addressed through the chair. And with regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Now moving to committee business. Pursuant to Standing Order 106(4), the committee is meeting today to consider a request received by the clerk and submitted by more than 4 members of the committee to discuss the mandate given by the House and the urgency for the committee to organize its proceedings and invite the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and other witnesses to appear. Members have all received the letter. I will now open the floor to debate. Who would like to speak first? I don't see a hand up.
Madame Michaud raised her hand, sir.
Madame Michaud, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the members of the committee who participated under 106(4), signed the letter so that we can plan how we want to hear our witnesses after the holidays. The goal is to discuss all of that today. I don't know, Mr. Chair, if you wish me to reread the motion so that we can really debate what the elements are that are specifically stated in the motion?
You ever a bad idea for members to have the reinforcement from the mover herself in this case? So why don't you proceed with that?
Parfait. Je vais tenter d'y aller.
Perfect. I'll try to read it slowly. but I think interpretation is working well, and I'd like to thank the interpreters. So that in addition to the meeting already scheduled by the Standing Committee on Public Safety on December 15, 2021, to hear from the Minister of Public Safety and from departmental officials, the committee, A, hold by December 17, 2021, at least one additional meeting to hear from Royal Canadian Mounted Police officials for a duration of 3 hours. B, plan prior to the holiday break to invite representatives from the Border Services Agency and union representatives of the agency's employees to appear for a period of 3 hours, and that this meeting be held no later than February 4th, 2022. C, plan additional meetings to hear from witnesses based on suggestions from the various parties on the committee, with the understanding that they will provide their suggestions to the clerk of the committee no later than Friday, January 14, 2022 at 4 p.m. And D, reports its findings and recommendations to the House no later than February 25, 2022. So that was the motion, and I would like to add that, yes, this seems to be a fairly short time frame. However, since this entire topic was put forward urgently, for example, we saw gun violence in Montreal and other cities in Canada, this is a topic we really need to examine quickly, and that's what explains these fairly short time frames so that we can provide specific recommendations to the government in the House. So I would be pleased to hear what my colleagues have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Clerk, I am not seeing hands up on my screen right now, but I'm positive there are. If you can see which hands are up, I would ask you to call on them, please.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Dama is next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you through you to the clerk for assisting with the technology here. I want to thank the members of the committee for bringing this motion forward. Gun violence is an issue that is of great importance to our government and to me personally, having worked on this issue in previous renditions of this committee. So first of all, thank you, and thank you, Madame Michaud. Merci beaucoup for your leadership on seeing this come to the committee. I do have a number of amendments that I would like to make to it, all of which are to make the committee, the study more efficient. I do have the changed motion in both official languages. I only have track changes in English, so I can't distribute that, but I can go through that for you. And if I could just generally speak to them, and then I'll go through each one at a time, Chair, if that's okay.
Fine.
Because A and B go together. So the first change would be to delete Clause A. And the rationale for that is because having the RCMP and the CBSA appear at the same committee meeting by February 4th would be more efficient and more productive for the committee, so that when the RCMP says that's not us, it's CBSA, or when the CBSA says that's not us, it's the RCMP, both agencies are before the committee at the same time to respond. So the first amendment I have is to delete Clause A. Chair, will I have the floor to go through all of these amendments, because I have 4 of them?
Yes, I think that might be the most efficient way of doing it.
Okay, so...
Clerk, do you have a view of that?
Yes,
Do you want to do them one by one?
Yes, actually, one amendment at a time.
Okay. Okay, well then I'll pause after hearing the substance of the First Amendment and ask other members of the committee for comment. And again, I cannot see hands up, so Clerk, I'll ask you. There are no hands up to comment on the First Amendment. Then would we then proceed to a vote on the First Amendment?
Madame Michaud just raised her hand.
Madame Michaud, the floor is yours.
Non, désolée, c'est un peu, je pense que vous avez de la difficulté à nous voir.
Yes, I think you might be having a hard time seeing us, but we'll work things out. My first question would be, however, there's also the unions for the agency's employees. So if there's only one meeting with the CBSA and the RCMP, would we also be hearing the unions at the same time? Because what union representatives have to say is just as important as what the agencies have to say. Would that all be together? It's really a logistics issue.
Madam Damoff.
So it already, the change that I made already includes the CBSA union. So are you wanting to include the RCMP union as well?
Particulièrement.
Not particularly. It was really just to ensure that the union would be there at the same time as the CBSA, even if we're adding other participants. Because if I understand correctly, you want to have the RCMP appear at the same time.
So I did not remove the CBSA union from your motion. As I said, I tried to honor the spirit of this motion as best I could. The only change that I will be proposing next is that the RCMP is added with the CBSA and the union representatives.
Okay, are there other comments about the First Amendment?
Ms. Dancho, sir.
Ms. Dancho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wondering from Ms. Damoff, I don't know if we have the track changes. I'm not sure. I'm just not clear.
I have them in English, but not in French.
Oh, okay. I don't think we have either. I'm just not seeing where the changes are made in here unless I'm not looking at the right document.
Can I
so it's just more
English?
if you have an extra document.
So
Has the staff distributed these changes, these track changes to members?
The document that was provided
Point of
by
order,
Ms.
Mr.
Damoff,
Chair.
sir, was distributed. It did not contain the track changes as far as I understand.
Point of
Well-
order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, point of order. Is that you, Mr. McKinnon? I can't see you.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Go ahead.
I think perhaps if Ms. Damoff were to actually read the amendment, it might be helpful.
Oh, okay.
That's fine, but I think that as a matter of good practice, moving forward, when there are amendments in front of the committee, those track changes should be printed and put in front of members of the committee. So can we note that? And since that's not the case now, the next best would be for Ms. Damoff to read the substance of the amendment.
So, Chair, I think I've got them in both official languages. It does not show up on my phone. So where would I send it to? How do I send it to the clerk?
Clerk?
Maybe actually if you could just give that to my staff, they could forward it on to you. They're just right here. And in the meantime, the first change I'm talking about doing is to delete Clause A of the 1064. So it would be deleting the line that says hold by December 17th, 2021, at least one additional meeting to hear from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police officials for a duration of 3 hours. So that clause would be deleted, and that's what we're voting on now. And the reason for doing that is because I propose adding the RCMP to Clause B.
Okay, so is that clear to all members of the committee? And are there any other comments before I ask for a vote on that First Amendment?
Ms. Dancho, sir, raise her hand.
Ms. Dancho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to hear from our block committee member her thoughts on this, if she's supportive, if it's something that she feels will achieve the outcome that she's desiring with her motion, and would appreciate her feedback.
Madame Michaud.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Dancho, for this opportunity. I liked Pam's argument stating that they will be able to say which issues are under which agency's responsibility. I just want to make sure that we have 3 hours for both organizations. And I agree with that. I'll say it in French.
Good. Any other comments on the first proposed amendment?
Mr.
Good,
Chair.
then.
No, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Pancho.
Just wondering, how would this impact? I know we were talking about a Friday meeting with the RCMP. Is that in the works? And if this is passed, will we not be able to see the RCMP on Friday?
You mean Thursday?
No, I think Thursday we're supposed to meet with the minister, and I think we were in discussions for a potential meeting on Friday, but we haven't heard. We were hoping to hear about that today.
Yeah, I didn't. First, I've heard of a possible Friday meeting, but at the will of the committee, we can discuss that. Clerk, are you aware of the possibility of a Friday meeting?
I have not received any directions or.
Okay, well, let's deal with the issues one at a time here. I gather that the wording of the House, which asks the committee to meet with the CBSA and the RCMP for 3 hours at its convenience, gives the committee some discretion on how many meetings it might take to reach those 3 hours. And looking at the issues sequentially, the first order of business is to deal with the 106(4) and the amendments that arise from this discussion. And we're involved in discussing the First Amendment now. So are there any other comments about the First Amendment? Okay, Clerk, how do you want to proceed with a vote?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Danton.
Point of order?
From Lloyd.
I can't see whose hand is up. Who's got the point of order?
It said Dane Lloyd, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Lloyd, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've listened intently at the amendments twice, but like I learn by reading, and I still haven't seen a copy of the amendment, and I'm still a bit confused about what the amendment is. And so, like, as a standing practice or standing order practice of the committee, the chair has to submit the amendment to the committee before it can be voted upon, and I still haven't seen a copy of it. And I've listened twice, but I'm still not 100% sure what this amendment is really proposing. And I would hope that the future amendments that the member is going to be proposing today would also be distributed so that we can avoid going through this confusion again. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I accept your point, and I agree that members of the committee should have a printed copy of the amendments as proposed. So what's necessary, Clerk, to make that happen?
I think maybe Ms. Damoff has an answer to that question, sir. She raised her hand.
Okay, Ms. Damoff?
The members do have a copy of the revised motion in French and English. It just does not have track changes. But they do have a copy of the revised motion in both official languages in front of them. So they do have everything there. It is always nice to have track changes, but it's not required. And as I said, I do have it in English. I'm endeavoring to get it in French with track changes, but the members do have the amended motion in front of them, Chair.
Do members have amended motion in front of them? That's yes. Unless I hear from any member of the committee who does not have the amended motion in both official languages in front of them, I will assume that that is in front of members and that we can then proceed. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. Clerk, I see an empty chair there, so maybe that's because you're running around distributing pieces of paper. But we have had a discussion of Ms. Damoff's First Amendment that I'm now prepared to call for a vote. Now I see another hand up. Ms. Danjo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Further to my last comment, I'll just clarify. So in the original motion, A said, it says the following from Ms. Jode: hold by December 17th, 2021, which is this Friday, at least one additional meeting to hear from the RCMP for a duration of 3 hours. So my comment just previous, what I was asking is now Ms. Damoff's motion takes out the requirement to have it by December 17th, this Friday, and involves this, and then adds the CBSA. So we have to have the CBSA and RCMP together before February 4th, whereas Ms. Michaud's original motion said we'd have to have the RCMP by this December 17th, Friday. So I'm just wanting the committee to be clear that the amendment will, in essence, ensure that we will not see the RCMP before we rise for break. And I just want to make sure that that's was the aim of Ms. Michaud in her motion.
I think we heard from Madame Michaud. We'll hear from her again if she has more to add, and also from Ms. Damoff. Madame Michaud?
Well, I just want to clarify a point. The document that was distributed to us is Pam's amended motion, right? Yes. So I see that the duration of the testimony is being changed. So is that a new amendment that will be tabled, or the one we have here? I mean, it's fine if we move the RCMP to later, but we want them here for 3 hours, same for the CBSA and also the unions. So I just want to make sure that the hours aren't quite being mentioned.
So, Chair, I was putting it in the time of our committee meetings, which is 2 hours. However, if the member feels strongly about 3, I won't move that part of the amendment. So, in essence, right now we're only discussing A, but I would, assuming that the clerk can do 3 hours and the committee can do 3 hours at a time, then I won't move that portion of B when we get to that.
Okay, I see that Mr. Van Popta has his hand up to add to the discussion. Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Good, thank you. So part of my question has been answered already, but yeah, my concern is that the original motion from Ms. Michaud is 3 hours for the RCMP, and then a subsequent meeting, 3 hours with CBSA and union representatives, and now it's all being squeezed into one meeting of 2 hours. Maybe it becomes 3 hours, but still it is 3 sets of witnesses in one meeting over 2 or 3 hours, where it was going to be 6 hours originally. Is my understanding correct of the amendment and of the original motion? And also, what does Ms. Michaud say about, what is essentially a reduction in time that's being allocated to a very important study?
Madame Michaud?
Je pense que ce serait peut-être.
Well, I think it would be more up to Pam to clarify, because what my understanding was that even if we don't hear the RCMP before Christmas, after Christmas we would hear them for 3 hours, as was intended in the original motion.
Madame Damoff.
So my intention was to have both agencies. Actually, Chair, I think there are others that have had their hands up before me, but if you want to recognize me, that's fine.
If I may, Mr. Chair, Mr. McGregor raised his hand earlier.
Okay, Mr. McGregor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's, we can find a compromise here. We do have to be mindful of the order from the House, which does in Part D of the motion specify a period of 3 hours. So I think there's a relatively easy fix where we take Ms. Damoff's amendment to this motion, make a quick change to the number of hours, go from 2 to 3. It doesn't, because of the constraints with where committees can meet and the House resources that we have, we may have to spread it over 2 meetings, but as long as we get the 3 hours so that we honor the House motion and what Ms. Michaud's intent is with her motion directing this committee study, I would submit that we compromise, amend Ms. Damoff's amendment so that it reads 3 hours and includes the RCMP and CBSA. I hope committee members will agree to that as a quick fix, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Mr. McKinnon, your hand is up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd certainly like to support Mr. McGregor's comments. I just want to observe to the committee that we don't need to get over litigious about the particular times and particular meetings. We have the scope to add and adjust as we go forward. The House motion does not require us to have these 3-hour meetings, or 3-hour sessions with the minister or the RCMP in one fell swoop. They can be spread out over time. We can absolutely honor the intent of the House motion, but I would recommend that we don't get too bound up in particular dates and times at this time, that we can adjust as we go forward so that we can give a full and robust study before us.
Thank you. Mr. Van Putta. You had a hand up?
I think my question has been answered, but I would support what Mr. McGregor is saying, but I would just want to speak in favor of having 2 separate meetings if that is what is required. It's a very important study, and I think that we need to give it the time that it requires.
Thank you. Mr. Noor Mohammed, your hand is up. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was something to say, in respect of what Mr. McGregor and Mr. McKinnon said. I think that, we may wish to take advantage of the fact that the House motion is not clear, is not specific to having a 3-hour block. Our ability to potentially have those conversations spread over 1 or 2 different sessions will allow us, I think, time and effort to consider what we may have heard. So I would support what Mr. McKinnon is saying, and I think it does allow the committee to do its work perhaps in a more fulsome way.
Okay, Ms. Damoff, you've heard the discussion around the detail of your First Amendment. Are you supportive of what the consensus seems to be? And if you could articulate that consensus. Oh, I have another hand up before I ask you to do that.
Mr. Shipley has his hand up.
Mr. Shipley has his hand up. Go ahead, Mr. Shipley.
Thank you very much. Just quickly, I don't want to belabor this issue too much. I agree with what Mr. McGregor is saying and the tone of it. I like, especially we're all going at Christmas time. Conciliatory efforts are great. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. But at the same point, Mr. McKinnon, I think that sometimes the devil's in the detail. And I think sometimes around this table, we need to decide now what we're doing, when we're doing, going forward. It clears up a lot of sometimes confusion down the road. So as much as I hate to sit here in the minutiae of it and waste time on planning meetings and times, because we really want to get into the study and make some resolution, I think today is the day we sit here. We figured exactly where we're going as a committee. Let's get it figured out. I think Mr. McGregor's got us on the right track. Let's just get the details down and know where we're going into the new year is my opinion on it. So thank you.
Okay, I think we've had a pretty robust discussion. Ms. Damoff, I'll give you what might be the last word on this before we take it to a vote.
Thanks, Chair.
So you can summarize the consensus that I think is discernible around the table, and then we'll move.
So the vote we're doing right now is only on removing Clause A, but the second part is contingent on that. I'm in agreement that 3 hours is appropriate. So I will, when we get to the Clause B, I will not move to change that to 2.
Okay.
And the intent will be that the RCMP and CBSA appear together at one meeting for 3 hours. 3 hours with those 2 agencies. For any of you who have been in these meetings, you know that that's more than ample time to deal with the issues that will be before us. So, but I know that right now we're only dealing on A. So the motion right now is to remove paragraph A from the motion in front of us.
Okay, I believe we have consensus, but Clerk, how do you want to proceed with a vote on the First Amendment?
Record the division, sir, unless there's unanimous consent.
Do we have unanimous consent? Is there anybody who disagrees with the proposed amendment? Hearing none, I would say we have unanimous consent. Excellent. Great start, everybody. Madam Damoff, Second Amendment.
Thanks, Chair. So in Clause B, the change would be to delete the words "plan prior to the holiday break" too, and then it would start with invite representatives from adding the word Canada. So invite representatives from the Canada Border Services Agency and union representative of the agency employees, adding the word and the RCMP, to appear for a period of 3 hours, and that this meeting be held no later than February the 4th, 2022. So the two agencies who would have a great deal to say on this issue would appear before our committee prior to February 4th, and the meeting would be for 3 hours. I would propose that if the House admin does not have the capability to do a 3-hour meeting, that during that week of February 4th, we have the ability to have a 2-hour and a 1-hour meeting. But regardless of how the logistics work, it would be for 3 hours as proposed by Madame Michaud.
Okay, and this would honor the spirit of the resolution of the House. Okay, then let's open the floor to discussion of the Second Amendment. Who would like to speak to it? I don't see any hands up. Clerk, do you?
No, sir. Ms. Dancho,
Then, pardon me?
Ms. Dancho, just now.
Ms. Dancho, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I'm just not clear. So the first motion that we moved was to combine, is A that I'm looking at here, correct? But we've just changed it from 2 hours as listed on your document to 3 hours.
I'm just not moving that part.
The Second Amendment proposes 3 hours in a combined meeting with the CBSA and the RCMP.
So the first motion was, I'm sorry, I thought that the first motion was to combine them.
It just deleted the Section A of the original motion.
Understood. So we're doing this in two parts, Part A of your document. Okay, understood.
Just a point of information.
Go ahead.
The numbering of these paragraphs on the two documents are different. So what we're modifying paragraph B of the original motion, but it shows up here on the amended version as paragraph A. So there's perhaps a discrepancy there.
Oh, it's A and B. New is just A. Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah, we'll make sure that the alphabet's in the right order.
Okay.
In both official languages. Thank you. So what I'm hearing is consensus on the Second Amendment, which would mean we do not have to have a recorded vote. But let me pause and make sure that I've got that right. Is there agreement that we proceed with the wording from Mrs. Damoff on the Second Amendment? We have unanimous consent. Excellent. So, Mrs. Damoff, off to the next amendment.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm a Ms., not a Mrs.
Okay.
So the next section relates to adding some to make this study more fulsome. So it would be a new clause to follow what is now Clause A and was Clause B. And this one is all new, and it would say include in this study the following urgent issues in relation to firearms. Subsection A, all the ways that firearms are illegally diverted, including domestic diversion. I think it's critical that when we're looking at how firearms are being used in crime, that we look at all the way firearms are finding their ways into criminals' hands, and that includes not only coming across the border, but also those that are sourced illegally domestically. The second clause is to include the increase in femicides using a firearm and the rise in gender-based violence when a firearm is involved. This is something that sadly has always been an occurrence, but since the pandemic began, the rise in femicide and gender-based violence where a firearm is involved has increased dramatically. I just last week read the Ontario report on femicide, and the number of cases where it involved a shooting was just absolutely terrible. Over the last 5 years, 500 women per year are victimized with firearms. And then the last item, C, is suicides, mental health, and the role of firearms. We know that over 75% of people who die by firearms are dying by suicide. We know that mental health is also an indicator of issues that we are having with firearms. So I think adding these three to our study is really critical. It's imperative, actually, if we're going to be taking a look at firearms. So those are the three items that I would like. Sorry, and a fourth one. Sorry, I didn't turn my own page. And then the fourth is recognizing the involvement in gangs in firearms, the review of the programs that address the causes of youth gang involvement, programs that prevent recruitment, retention, and diversion. And for those of you, I guess it's only Teiko and Christina, Clause D is actually taken word from word from the motion that we passed in the last Parliament around gangs. We're certainly seeing an increase in gang crime, only dealing with the firearms and not dealing with the gang portion of that in firearms is important. So as I said, I took the wording for D directly from the study that we were hoping to complete in the last Parliament and never got time to. So I'll leave it there, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Damoff. That's a substantive piece of work. And I now open the floor to commentary. And I see that Mr. McKinnon has his hand up. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we have maybe another discrepancy in the documentation. So Ms. Damoff is talking about subpoints A, B, C, and D, and so forth. On my document, there are small Roman numerals 1 through 4. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at the same thing.
We are. Sorry about that.
Okay, so when you say Part C and Part D, you meaning actually small Roman numeral 3 and 4, correct? Yes. Okay. Very well. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an important distinction. Madame Michaud.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think these are topics that are all very important. I'm just concerned. This was put forward very quickly. As I said at the beginning, this motion was because there is a huge problem with gun violence in Montreal and other large cities in Canada. But the initial motion was specifically about the trafficking of illegal weapons, and the crimes committed by street gangs is already in the motion by the House. So I'm afraid that if we broaden the scope of the study too much, even though these topics are very important topics that we could perhaps look at another time, I'm worried that we'll lose the focus on the initial point of the motion. I want the minister to tell us what we're going to do differently, what is going to be done differently at the border, what is going to be done to take firearms away from street gangs. So I'm afraid that we might get a little bit lost or diluted in the recommendations we can give to the government about the initial topic. So I'm a little bit conflicted. I'd be quite pleased to undertake another study on these topics after this current study, but to broaden the scope of this study so much, I mean, we'd have to look at how many meetings we'd have to hold, but I would be afraid of losing a bit of the focus on the initial look at the initial aim, which was to look at gun control across the border and why and how guns end up in the hands of our young people in our large cities. So those are my concerns.
Okay, thank you. We've got a bit of a speakers list that's forming. Next is Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm inclined to agree with Ms. Michaud on this matter. I agree that all of these amendments are important subjects to study, but I believe each and every one of them could be the subject of its entire own study. And given the limited time that we're giving ourselves to study this very important issue of crime, the rise of crime that we're seeing, illegal firearms trafficking over borders, I think it would water down this committee's ability to really target in and focus on that specific issue if we were to expand its scope with these important but additional very weighty issues. And so, I would encourage the members of this committee who want to study this to propose this as a separate study in and of itself, because it would be important. And I also believe that, the motion in and of itself, when we're talking about subsection Roman numeral 1, all the ways that firearms are illegally diverted, I believe, including domestic diversion, I believe that already would be covered by the existing motion because, there's nothing to stop witnesses from being asked or to provide evidence to talk about domestic diversion. I think that's something that absolutely would be considered on topic for this committee to discuss and to include in a report. And then subsection 4, particularly the involvement of gangs in firearms, I mean, absolutely, we should be reviewing programs that address the causes of youth gang involvement and recruitment, retention, and diversion. And I think that would already be covered in the scope of the existing study without the amendment. So I would just close by saying I'm in support of the concerns by Ms. Michaud, and that we should keep this committee study targeted on the spirit of the motion that was passed by unanimous consent in the House. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. McGregor.
I'm going to, again, suggest a compromise. I'm very, I know what led Ms. Damoff to include these because, of course, they do concern her and the people in her riding, and indeed in many communities here. When I look at the original motion that the House directed this committee with, it makes specific reference to gun control, illegal arms trafficking, and increasing gun crimes committed by members of street gangs. So perhaps, members of the committee, the compromise is for us to amend this section and maybe concentrate simply on Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 4. And I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Dancho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate Mr. McGregor's recommendation. I think just overall, the amendment does sort of take away the focus and the work done by our colleague, Ms. Michaud, on behalf of Quebec and the people of Montreal who've been significantly suffering over the last number of weeks from serious issues with criminal gang violence and gun violence. And I do think that the focus should be kept on the motion, which was very inclusive of a lot of, I think, the spirit of what Ms. Damoff is hoping to achieve in her amendment. But if we look at it again, it says a priority study on gun control, illegal arms trafficking, and the increase in gun crimes committed by gang members. So to me, and I know to many members of this committee, the focus of this study is urgent, and it needs to be on gang members, illegal arms trafficking, which, as we know, 80% of gun crime in Canada is from gun smuggling, which to me was quite a large oversight on this amendment from Ms. Damoff, unfortunately, that does not include that. And I was particularly concerned about number 4, how it says recognizing the involvement of gangs in firearms. I don't believe that language is nearly strong enough. This gang violence is the one of the number one issues in the Bloc's motion that we need to be focusing on. And the way that it is worded sort of downplays the significance of the focus of the Bloc's original motion. So I do have significant concerns that we are broadening the scope and diluting what Ms. Michaud was hoping to study. But I do agree with my colleague, Mr. Lloyd, that these are all worthy of study, but that it does broaden the scope beyond what Ms. Michaud was hoping to do, and also does not focus enough on the gang issue and the trafficking, particularly across the U.S. border. So I have considerable concerns, and I do believe the motion, as it was directed from the House, is sufficient in terms of narrowing the scope and increasing the urgency of this study.
Thank you. Mr. Van Popta.
Good, thank you. So much of what I was intending to say has already been said. I agree with Ms. Damoff that these are all very important studies, and I do remember from the previous Parliament that we wanted to undertake some of these studies, particularly relating to gang violence. But the study is becoming very broad with the inclusion of these additional considerations. So I would support any any initiative to commence a separate study for these very important topics. But to include it in this one, I think is probably loading too much onto it. I respect Mr. McGregor's compromise position, but I would say that the original wording is probably good enough the way it is without including B in the motion at all. So I would advocate for just to keep it a narrower study for now, knowing that the door is always open for us to introduce these studies. And I would certainly support that at that time. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Demoff.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I appreciate our colleague from the NDP. I think we're going to give him a referee jersey. To be the mediator in this, and very much appreciate his suggestions. I am also appreciative of the Conservative Party saying they're willing to study femicides and mental health and suicides. I will hold your feet to the fire on that one and take you at your word that you are interested in studying those issues. They're ones that are incredibly important. I recall speaking to a woman's shelter from Lethbridge, Alberta, who said that every single woman who came into that shelter was there because of a firearm in the home. Women in Canada should not be afraid and should not be dying, and we need to be, because of firearms, and we need to be taking that seriously and studying it. So I'll take you at your word that you are interested in studying that at a later date. I think that the first and the fourth additions that I put forward would be important to include. And while I can't remember who said they didn't think the language was strong enough, I was trying to, Mr. Van Popta will remember we spent hours coming up with wording on gangs, and so in the spirit of trying not to re-debate that, I used the wording that we decided between Mr. Couric and I think it was Mr. Sickand at the time, and all of us being involved. So I think Mr. McGregor's compromise of including I and 1 and 4, small I and small IV, and dropping the middle two would be agreeable. And perhaps, Chair, I could suggest that maybe we vote on each of the 4 separately. Or if Mr. McGregor wants to amend my motion to remove those 2 middle ones, that would be fine with me as well.
I have Mr. McKinnon with a hand up. I'll ask him first. Mr. McKinnon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak in favor of this amendment. I think all of these issues are inextricably intertwined, and it's very important that we consider them all. It is fully in keeping with the spirit of the House Amendment. It should be noted that we cannot reduce the scope of the House Amendment. Whatever we do here can only expand it. So if you find that the wording in the House Amendment, or the House motion, sorry, is more strong, then that is what shall prevail. And really the true scope of the study is going to be determined by the witnesses we call, which is really up to all of us, and the questions we ask of those witnesses. There's no reason for that to dilute the results of this study. The analysts are very adept at extracting the information that is presented to us by the various witnesses, and then we, of course, are fully able to to put forward our recommendations as well. Having said that, I also have no problem with supporting Mr. McGregor's amendments should he make that should he wish to amend Ms. Demoff's amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Michaud.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also like compromises. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. But in this case, I would maintain my initial position, that is to concentrate on the initial motion referred to us by the House, where there's already mention of street gangs. We want to talk about firearms trafficking, and I will repeat exactly what Mr. Van Popta said. These are very important topics that have been added by Pam, but what we want to focus on right now is a little bit different. So the compromise is reasonable, but I will maintain my position, that is to retain the initial motion without amending it. So I would be against that amendment.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. The suggestion has been forwarded that you may want to consider an amendment to Ms. Damoff's amendment. Can we hear from you, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for your benefit and the clerks and all committee members, I will formally move that we amend Ms. Damoff's motion by deleting Roman numeral 2 and deleting Roman numeral 3, and we, by virtue of that, we keep Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 4, which I guess we can renumber as part of the new clause B.
Maybe just for clarity, we should not only renumber them, but remind committee members of the substance within them. If you could just read them, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so if we were to delete those two, Chair, the new section would read as follows. B, include in this study the following urgent issues in relation to firearms. Roman numeral 1, all the ways that firearms are illegally diverted, including domestic diversion. And Roman numeral 2, which is now the renumbered one, recognizing the involvement of gangs in firearms, the review of programs that address the causes of youth gang involvement, programs that prevent recruitment and retention, and diversion.
Okay, thank you. So we now have the proposed amendment to Ms. Damoff's amendment. So it is there for members for commentary. Do I see any hands? I think I see a hand. Whose hand is that?
It's Lloyd, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, go ahead.
So I'm just wondering, given that nobody else is speaking on this, if we can move it to a vote and possibly get this through on unanimous consent.
Okay, that would be an excellent place to start. Can we ask members of committee if there's unanimous consent for this amendment to Ms. Damoff's amendment? Do we have unanimous consent? We do not.
Just a question for clarity.
Yep.
So we vote on the amendment, but then we go back to the original motion, right? So if I think that the motion is better with Mr. McGregor's amendment, I would vote in favor, but I could still vote against the main motion.
Yep. Well, if the amendment passes, then...
If the amendment passes, of course. Right? Otherwise, we
and
vote on the original motion without amendment.
We would vote on the amendment first, would we not, Clerk?
Of course.
On the amended amendment.
On the sub-amendment first.
On the sub-amendment. So why don't we do that since I don't think we have unanimous consent, or did I miss something? Do we have unanimous consent for the sub-amendment?
No, we didn't.
It's okay.
Okay.
Oh, it's okay? Okay. Yeah,
oh, it is okay. We do.
Okay.
Well, that's wonderful.
I'll vote against.
Okay. So just for clarity, we don't have unanimous consent. We have Madame Michaud voting against and the other members of the committee voting in favor. Is that correct?
Ben, au final, ça change rien parce que je vais...
Well, in the end, it doesn't change anything because I will be voting for the against the amended motion, so we can have unanimous consent to amend the sub-amendment. I mean, do you see what I'm saying? Yes, am I clear?
Yes, I do. Clerk, did you want to add something here? No? Okay, so we have unanimous consent to approve the sub-amendment. And now we have in front of us the amendment itself. We have had a discussion of it. Is there any other further commentary that members of the committee want to offer at this stage before we put the amendment to a vote?
Ms. Dancho, sir.
Ms. Dancho?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a sub-amendment to move on the now amended amendment. And I do believe that the sub-amendment I'm proposing will capture a bit of the spirit of the original motion from the House. That is my aim. And it's just to strengthen some of the language so that our aims of the original motion are clear. So under number 1, Roman numeral 1, all the ways that firearms are illegally diverted, including smuggling across the United States border and domestic diversion. So again, it's just adding in that extra additional emphasis that was implied in the original motion from the bloc. So again, all the ways that firearms are legally diverted, including smuggling across the U.S. border and domestic diversion. And then under what was previously 4, which I guess is now 2, crossing out the word recognizing, because I do believe that depreciates the importance of the gang issue. So it would look like this: the increasing involvement of gangs in firearms, the review of programs that address the causes of youth gang involvement, programs that prevent recruitment and retention, and the causes of high recidivism rates, or repeat offenders, but recidivism rates. And the reason for that last addition is because we know gang members are often repeat offenders that commit gun violence over and over again. So I think that does bring more emphasis and seriousness to the gang focus that the bloc had originally. So again, number 2 would be the serious involvement of gangs in firearms, the review of the programs that address the causes of youth gang involvement, programs that prevent recruitment and retention and diversion, and the causes of high recidivism rates.
Again, there's the issue of whether members have printed copies of this proposed sub-amendment, or are
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Point of order.
I would not have a sub-amendment printed because we did not receive the amendment prior to this meeting. So there wouldn't be a way that we could have done that because we were not given the opportunity to review this before the committee began. So I would ask that you proceed with my sub-amendment.
Yeah. Clerk, what is the protocol in a situation such as this?
Point of order.
Whose point of order?
Mr. McGregor, sir.
Mr. McGregor, go ahead.
Yeah, I believe, Mr. Chair, because the clause we are considering is already before the committee, Ms. Dancho is in order in proposing a sub-amendment at this time. It is not a brand new motion that any of us have never seen before, so I think her sub-amendment this time is something that is in order. I think it's been the practice of many committees that I've been on. I'm following along quite easily.
Yeah, as long as members are comfortable that they're following the gist of the substance of the sub-amendment. And if that's the case, then we're okay. Okay, so other commentary on Ms. Dancho's sub-amendment. Floor is open.
Mr. McKinnon, sir, followed by Madame Michaud.
Mr. McKinnon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak in opposition to this particular sub-amendment. I think it's, that the first part of it, I think, is incorporated already in the House motion. There's no need to strengthen that or emphasize it. It is what it is. We cannot in any way reduce the strength of what the House has given to us, and that's the main point. Recognize the involvement. I think it's, I don't have a problem with recognizing involvement. The involvement that we recognize might well be an increase, but I don't want to presuppose that outcome. So I would oppose this sub-amendment.
Madame Michaud.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification, Ms. Dancho would like us to add increasing or serious before involvement in point 4 to strengthen the wording. Is that what it was? And was there something that was added? Because I'm not sure I heard it correctly.
Ms. Dancho, if you would please repeat and clarify.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Michaud. Just to clarify again, just trying to emphasize the importance of gang violence in this study. So right now, as it stands, it says recognize the involvement of gangs in firearms, which I don't believe gives nearly enough emphasis on the serious issue of gang violence in Montreal and what's been happening. So I think we take out recognizing and we simply say the increasing involvement of gangs in firearms. So that would be the first part. And then at the very end of point 2 of this point, we would just add and causes of high recidivism rates. Because we know gang violence these are repeat offenders that cause a lot of these shootings and the violent crime that we're seeing in our cities. So again, it's just taking something that is including a lot. Again, Ms. Damoff, we're now going to be looking at programs. But I think if we're going to be expanding it the way that she's recommending, then we certainly must be looking at the rate of recidivism in Canada, because that is a part of the gang violence that we're seeing. So again, the aim of the amendment is just to focus the attention on the problem, which is gang violence. So that's my aim. It's perhaps not the most eloquent, but on the fly. Yeah, thanks.
Merci.
Yeah, I think on the fly is an appropriate description of many things. Ms. Damoff, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chair. I think the first change is redundant. I don't think we need to add that. It's included in illegally diverted. I'm ambivalent whether it says recognizing or increasing. It doesn't really matter. As I said, I used the wording from a previous motion at Public Safety, hoping that we wouldn't have to debate, but the increasing is fine. I think adding causes of high recidivism could be covered under the wording that's already there, if that's the focus that people want to take when we have witnesses, including the witnesses that they choose to call. So I think it's already covered in the wording that is there. So I think the changes are not needed, to be honest with you. I think we'll accomplish the same things with what we've already done, which we've already put forward.
Mr. Lloyd.
Yeah, just rereading this and, in support of my colleague's amendments. But one thing that is confusing to me, and it might be confusing to Canadians when they read this study, is the final line, which says, include in the study the following urgent issues in relation to firearms, address the causes of youth gang involvement, programs that prevent recruitment and retention and diversion. And I don't think we're talking about programs that are preventing diversion. It kind of seems confusing there. We should be talking about programs that are encouraging diversion. And so the wording's kind of confusing because it says we're reviewing programs that prevent diversion, but we should be looking at programs that encourage, unless I'm mistaken with what the purpose of the term diversion is. Yeah. It's kind of unclear, and maybe that could use some more clear wording as well.
Ms. Dancho.
Oh, I didn't have my hand up, but I do have a comment. I think my issue with illegally diverted is that's not the common terminology that we see. Again, 80% of gun violence is in Canada as a result of gun smuggling across the U.S. border. So it may be redundant, but the way that it is worded currently does not make it clear that that is the aim. Or if we want to look at the original motion, the way that Ms. Michaud wrote it, illegal arms trafficking, we could also use that language. But illegally diverted is not the recognized term when discussing this with stakeholders that I've seen, with police forces, forces at the border, victims' rights advocates. Smuggling over the border is perhaps a colloquial term, but again, if you're not happy with that, then I recommend that we talk about perhaps another sub-amendment saying illegal arms trafficking. But I'm certainly not happy with the way that is written right now, because it's not clear what the aim of that is.
Okay, are there other comments on Ms. Dancho's sub-amendment?
Mr. Ship.
Mr. Van Saka? And then Mr. Shipley.
Good. So thank you in support of what my colleague Ms. Dancho said. I agree that the term illegally diverted to me is not clear. I had a question in question period a while ago, and Minister Blair relating to the source of firearms used in crimes, and he said, well, there are three sources. They're stolen from legal gun owners, they are straw purchased, or they are smuggled in. So those are the three categories that he used, and I'm just not sure what the term illegally diverted means. Is that just a general term that captures all sources of firearms used in crime? Let's just stick to I would say colloquial and accepted language, commonly understood.
Okay, we've had a pretty good discussion of this. If there are no more hands up, I would proceed to a vote on Ms. Dancho's sub-amendment. Clerk, how do you proceed in this case? Do we do a recorded vote?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all those in favor of...
Sorry, sir, recorded division.
Yes, recorded division.
So
Correct?
that's correct, yes. So I'm going to go ahead and...
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead.
Just a point of clarification. Mr. Chair, there was some discussion from my Conservative colleagues that they were unhappy with the term illegally diverted. Like, have they formally decided to change that form, or are we just sticking with what Ms. Dancho read into the record? I just want to be clear before we have a vote what we're voting on.
Yeah, and again, I think had it been given more time, it could have been a bit more eloquent, but just in the essence of time, I just wanted for our clarification of the terminology that the Minister himself has used and others, including smuggling across the U.S. border and domestic diversion. And actually, now that I think about it, the Liberal members have said that they have an issue with the redundancy, but again, their own number one has their own redundancy then within that argument, illegally diverted, including domestic diversion, which arguably could be included in their definition of illegally diverted. So again, to Mr. McGregor's point, it would just simply say including smuggling over the U.S. border and domestic diversion. So again, trying to work with the original amendment, but just making it more clear with the language, as my colleague Van Popta said. Yeah.
Point of order here.
Point of order, Mr. McKinnon.
Yeah, I understand Mr. McGregor's concern, but that's not what was moved as a sub-amendment, and we really can't amend a sub-amendment. So, okay, so we are left with the sub-amendment as originally moved by Ms. Dancho. Correct. Okay, thank you.
Okay, are members of the committee clear on what's before them that's about to be put to a vote? Are there any points of clarification that needed to be reinforced, or are we ready for the division? Okay, clerk, recorded on division, please. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. So the question is on the sub-amendment moved by Ms. Dancho. Mr. Chang?
I vote no.
Mr. Amel?
No.
Mr. McKinnon?
I vote no.
Mr. Noor Mohammed?
Vote no.
Mr. Zuberi?
I vote no.
Ms. Dancho?
I vote yes.
Mr. Lloyd?
Yes.
Shipley?
Yes.
So did you call me?
Van Popta?
I vote yes.
Madame Michaud?
En faveur.
Mr. McGregor?
All the suspense. I vote yes.
Passes.
Yeas pour, 6, nays contre, 5.
Thank you. Historic moment, our first vote as a committee. Ms. Demoff, back to you. Are there other amendments that
Just
you
one
wish
more,
to
Chair.
propose? Okay, go ahead.
One, maybe two. I don't know if the committee realizes that the date of the original motion has the wrong date for the minister coming. He's actually coming on the 16th, not on the 15th, but I'll leave that to somebody else to change if they want to. The last, sorry.
Point of order.
Point of order, Mr. McKinnon?
We still have to vote on the motion. We voted on the sub-amendments and the sub-amendment. We're back to the main motion, or to the motion, which was Ms. Demoff's amendment. So.
Let's go back to the main motion and see if we have unanimous consent for it. Back to, is there a hand up there? I think I see one. I see two hands up. I don't know who they are. Somebody tell me who it is. Is it Mr. Lloyd?
Mr. Lloyd.
I
and
feel
then
like
Mr.
I'm in the
Van
Wizard of
Popta.
Oz, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So pay no attention to the man on the screen, I guess. I wanted to move another sub-amendment. Please don't hate me for this, but it's just related to the earlier point that I made, is that is it just me, or is the wording kind of confusing, even with the, programs that prevent recruitment and retention and diversion? Is that just me? I would like to move a sub-amendment to clarify that language, to clarify that we're looking at programs that prevent recruitment and retention, and programs that promote diversion. So I think that would just be one quick line that could, clarify that wording, so that it doesn't look like we're trying to prevent diversion. So I guess I will move a sub-amendment, and I hope I can get unanimous consent that we just change that one line, that we have programs that prevent recruitment and retention and programs that promote diversion. So just 2 words, programs that promote, 3 words, diversion. So just a 3-word sub-amendment there.
I would open that up to commentary among members of the committee.
Are you paying attention to the speaking order?
Ms. Damoff?
That's an excellent amendment, and would be happy to vote in favor of that.
Others? Keeping in mind that I cannot see hands. Mr. Van Popta?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for Ms. Damoff for that clarification. So I agree that that's a good amendment. So thank you for that. But just a point of clarification, I'm not quite sure what we are voting on now, other than my colleague Mr. Lloyd's sub-motion. But I think the original sub-motion was to delete subparagraphs 2 and 3. Have we voted on that already? And so we're down to just 1 and the new 4, which is now number 2, with Mr. Lloyd's now small amendment. Is that what we're voting on?
A point of information, if you will.
Go ahead, Mr. McKinnon.
Yes, so the original motion, as made by Ms. Damoff, was amended by Mr. McGregor to drop off Roman numerals 2 and 3, and subsequently modified by Ms. Dancho to modify the language in 1 and 4, I believe. I'm not sure about 4, but anyway, that change was made, and that passed, and it is now being further modified by Mr. Lloyd to add some clarification to paragraph 4. So that last amendment to modify the language of subparagraph Roman numeral 4 is what we're voting on right now.
Thank you.
Chair, it's Pam.
Hey, is there...
Yeah, I just have a comment, Chair.
Ms. Damoff, go ahead.
Because we've added "and causes of high recidivism" at the end of this paragraph, I'm a little worried now with your addition that we're saying encourage the causes of high recidivism. I'm just wondering if I agree with what you're saying, Mr. Lloyd, but I'm just a little concerned that now with the wording that's in there, I'm wondering if it should say programs that prevent recruitment and retention and causes of high recidivism, and then your part. So move the diversion part to the end of the sentence.
Mr. Chair, it's Mr. Lloyd.
Yeah, go ahead.
I view that as a friendly amendment, and so I would support that friendly amendment.
Okay. Is there other commentary about this proposed sub-amendment? Just spoke. Do we have unanimous consent in that case for the proposed sub-amendment? Looks like we do. Now we have to go back to the original motion, if I understand, Clerk. Is that correct?
The original amendment, sir.
Yep. Do we have unanimous consent for the original amendment as put forward by Ms. Damoff? Hearing no objections?
Mr. Chair, it would be the motion as amended in the various sub-amendments, right?
Right. The motion as amendment in various sub-amendments. Is that clear? Madame Michaud, would you like the floor?
Are there any other amendments that will be brought forward for point C and D, or we are just voting on the motion the way it was amended right now? Because, just for clarification, because I think what we saw in the document we got from Pam is not the same thing as we had in the original motion, which included dates. So I was wondering whether there will be other amendments put forward.
Ms. Damoff.
We're only voting on the amendment to the additions to the study. We're not voting on the motion yet because there's still another change that I want to make to the motion. So it's only on the expansion of the study. So it's the amendment as we're voting on the amendment as amended. Right?
We're voting on the amendment as amended to expand the scope of the study. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do we have unanimous consent for that? We do. And that leaves the original amendment, Ms. Damoff, correct?
I have one more change, Chair.
Go ahead.
Okay, in the last bullet point, it's not realistic to have the witnesses' testimony and recommendations back to the House by February 18th. I think we all know how long it takes for an analyst to write the report, and being in fairness to our amazing analysts, hello, Holly, I haven't had a chance to say hello yet. I would say, again, keeping in the spirit of the original motion, that we delete the words report its findings and recommendations to the House, and that we say complete witness testimony no later than February 18th, 2022. I would just point out that February 25th is not a sitting date, so I've moved it to the last sitting date in February. At which point, and then add these words, at which point the committee will draft and complete a report to be tabled in the House no later than March 31st, 2021. So that gives us adequate time, I believe, to get a report written, recommendations, and review it. But it also recognizes the urgency of this issue and wanting to get a report back to the House in a timely manner. And so I think giving ourselves the month to report back to the House is reasonable. But as we saw with the systemic racism study, report writing can drag on for weeks and weeks and months. So adding the March 31st date puts pressure on each one of us to make sure that we're being efficient when we're meeting to review the report. So those would be the changes that I have, Chair.
Thank you. The floor is open for comments from members of the committee.
Just a point of, well, I think it's a typo. The date in that motion is 2021. It should be 2022.
2021. Oh, gosh.
The power of retrospect. Okay, that's been duly noted. Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Other comments on Ms. Damoff's suggestions? Ms. Dancho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to confirm if that this will mean we'll have 6 meetings total for this study. I just want confirmation that is sufficient in Ms. Michaud's opinion, and that is the aim or the result of this amendment.
Clerk, is that the,
7,
right
I guess,
math?
including this Thursday. Thank you, Dan.
So that's the right math?
I'm on 22.
7 meetings in total? Okay. Does that answer your question, Ms. Dancho?
I believe so. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the proposed amendment from Ms. Damoff, which has to do with deadlines? Mr. Lloyd?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, you know, I've been in this place for a few years, but maybe somebody who has more experience here might know better. If we were to table the report in the House by the end of March, how much time does that give the government to reply to the report? Would that be replied to before the House ends for the summer, or would that come in the fall when the House reconvenes?
Clerk, do you have an answer to that?
Yes, sir. It's 120 days.
There's a clear answer. So you do your math, the end of March, and then another 4 months. April, May. No, it would probably take us into the summer break, wouldn't it? Is my math correct? 120 days after the end of March takes us into the summer, I think is the right math. Other comments in response to Ms. Damoff's last amendment? Do we have unanimous consent to accept the amendment? We seem to have unanimous consent. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everybody. There are no other amendments to vote on. Clerk, go ahead. Now we have the whole thing. Now we go back vote on the whole thing. Right. So is there unanimous consent to approve the series of sub-amendments and the amendment? Ms. Damoff, do you have your hand off?
No, sorry, Chair. It's a thumbs up.
Well, it's a distinction between a hand up and a thumbs up that chairs have to pay a lot of attention to. Okay, so do we have unanimous consent to pass the motion as amended? Very good. Excellent work, committee. Excellent, excellent work. What I saw here was the spirit of a compromise, ending up in a place that expresses a common aspiration, and that's great. I'm very, very pleased. Mr. McGregor, do you have a hand up?
Yes, Mr. Chair. This is very quickly. I want to move the motion that I distributed to committee members earlier this week. It's a very simple motion. Just to give you some background, in the previous Parliament, the Public Safety Committee produced quite a comprehensive report on systemic racism in policing in Canada. So the purpose of my motion is to readopt that report, have the chair retable it in the House of Commons in this Parliament so that we may elicit a government response. And I'm going to make a slight amendment to it because I think there is a part that's not necessary. So I'm going to read it into the record so committee members understand what I'm doing. So it goes as follows, Mr. Chair, that pursuant to Standing Order 108.2, the committee undertake a study of systemic racism in policing in Canada, that the evidence and documentation received by the committee during the second session of the 43rd Parliament on the subject be taken into consideration by the committee in the current session, that the committee adopt the report entitled Systemic Racism in Policing in Canada, adopted during the second session of the 43rd Parliament, that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests the government to table a comprehensive response to the report, and that the chair present the report to the House. So for committee members, what I've done is I've deleted the part that asks for dissenting or supplementary opinions because I believe all members support or provided those and they're already part of the report, and I don't think we need to revisit it. So Mr. Clerk, I hope that's in order and reads clearly, and I'll leave it at that for any comments.
Thank you very much. I think it was clear. And I would open the floor for commentary from members. Ms. Damoff, your hand's up.
I had another motion, Chair. I'm good to support this one. This is an excellent motion from the opposition because that was an outstanding report that we did, and I think it's important that the government respond to it. So I'm fully supportive.
Well, let's do it one at a time. So let's deal with the motion that's on the table. Other commentary?
Madame Michaud first, sir.
Madame Michaud, followed by Ms. Dancho.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to Mr. McGregor, my colleague, for this motion. As Pam stated, it is a report that we worked on very hard last session. So, of course, we expect a response from the government. I just have a comment about the first word that the committee undertake in English, but the word is different in French. It just makes it sounds like the committee is going to conduct another study. I don't know what the intent was behind it, but I just wanted to make sure that in the end this motion states that we are sending the report back to the House for a response from the government, but that we're not starting the study all over again. It was just for clarification.
Mr. McGregor, can you clarify?
I've looked at the ways a number of committees have done these types of motions before, and there is a little bit of variance. We got the format for this particular motion from, I think, a clerk at the Immigration Committee, and I think it's just necessary that in order for the chair to retable the report, we first have to undertake a study. It's just basically a formalism. So I'm not asking for us to re-engage in this study. It's just to allow the chair to take the necessary steps to adopt a report and retable it. So I don't want to spend any more time than is necessary.
Clerk, I see a thumbs up from you.
Yes, sir.
That means this is the way it's done, and it does not require further study. It's just a matter of semantics. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
sir. I do concur with Mr. McGregor.
Okay. Mr. McKinnon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to speak up in favor of this motion as well. It often happens towards the end of a parliament that reports that are filed at the end of the given parliament, there is not enough time for the government to respond, and this just reactivates that clock, if you will, and gives the government a chance to respond substantively as requested. So I'm 100% in favor. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Michaud, floor is yours.
C'est bon, j'ai eu.
Yeah, I got the answer I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Van Popka.
Good, thank you. I too would speak in support of the motion. I was part of the study last time together with Pam and Christina. We did a lot of work. We saw a lot of witnesses. 19 meetings, according to the summary in the report, and over 50 witnesses and 42 recommendations. Well, it's a lot of work. It's an important study.
Wow.
I think it needs to be brought forward.
Good. Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I don't want to digress too much or, what the spirit of the committee is on this, which is an important study. I'm just concerned, between the completion of this report and today, we did have an election. And I know this was an issue that was discussed at the doors. And so I'm not asking us to reopen the study, but I might appreciate if we, having your amendment on to bring in, you're removing your sub-amendment to remove the dissenting reports for December 15th. And, maybe putting this forward as a friendly amendment, but, I'd like an opportunity to, have some time to review the report again and maybe have an opportunity to provide like a slightly changed, if necessary, because we did have an election, and I think it's important to demonstrate to Canadians that elections matter and that issues that are talked about during elections maybe should be reflected in a report rather than just accepting a report from the previous parliament without any opportunity for a review. So just my thoughts there.
Other commentary in response to Mr. Lloyd's intervention? I see Ms. Damoff.
Just to say that if you start reopening it up to adding dissenting reports, then you could reopen it to redoing the whole report. A lot of work was done on it. The parties did submit their dissenting reports. I think if we want to embark on a new study on systemic racism and do new reports on it, but I think as a whole report, the dissenting report is responding to recommendations that were in the report and the witness testimony, so I don't think we should be changing it. If Mr. McGregor wants to add that back in, I'd like to hear from him.
Mr. McGregor?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all of the parties included supplementary reports. I don't know if anyone dissented, so everyone was generally in agreement with all of the recommendations. Each party just added a little bit more color commentary to it at the end. And I appreciate, Mr. Lloyd, your wishes to re-examine the report, but really my intention with this motion is to ensure that we get a timely government response and to honor the huge amount of work that was done by the committee in the previous parliament. So that's my main motion, and I don't want to take away any more time from that main goal.
Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And not meaning to create a misunderstanding, there's no interest from me in reopening the study. I just noticed that your original amendment said that dissenting or supplementary opinions be in calibre, so I believe from your amendment that there would be an opportunity to maybe review supplementary opinions before pushing for this report to be picked up again. But it seems like you removing that has basically said that it's not necessary to review them because they're already in and there's no opportunity. Like, is there an opportunity to possibly change a supplementary opinion, or is there no opportunity now that it's in? You don't want any opportunity to look at a supplementary opinion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, so I would be in favor, Mr. Chair, of the motion as I read it out, with that the part referencing supplementary dissenting opinions to be removed completely. So I wouldn't support Mr. Lloyd putting it back in. I'd like to support the motion as I read it into the record the original time.
Okay, is there other commentary before we put this to a vote? Clerk, are you pointing to somebody with a hand up?
Yes, but
I just want to note that when the report was originally filed, there was an opportunity for all the parties to submit supplementary. The real point now is to get the government to respond to the report. The government wouldn't normally respond to the supplementary reports in any event. So the point is to get a government response, and that's the reason for going ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other comments before I seek unanimous consent? Do we have unanimous consent? I do not believe we do. So we would go to recorded division, clerk. Go ahead.
I think you do have unanimous support, Mr. Chair.
Oh, well, even better. I'm getting various circular motions from the clerk's right hand, so I'm not clear. Unanimous consent again. Holy smokes. We can change the world in this committee. Okay, Ms. Damoff, did you want the floor?
Please, Chair. I have a motion, which I
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I do believe I had my hand up first. And I think the video would show that, Mr. Chair. If you
Point of order, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Chair, sorry, point of order. I had my hand up at the same time as Mr. McGregor some time ago. So I think I did have my hand up. And I mentioned that when you came to me to respond to Mr. McGregor's motion as well, that I had my hand up on another motion, and you said I would be recognized right after Mr. McGregor.
Mr. Chair, the same could be said for me. So, again, the motion was carried. My hand went up first. So I would appreciate being called on by you, Mr. Chair. My hand was up first.
Well, sorry, your hand was up when we asked for unanimous consent, or was there another matter?
Immediately following.
And so was mine.
Go ahead.
So was mine,
Thank you,
Chair.
Mr. Chair. Thank
I
you,
know,
Mr.
I'm
Chair.
not going to, with all due respect, I think the Chair
We can review the
rule
video
on
if
it.
you'd like, Ms. Demoff, but my hand was up
think it's
before
to the-
yours.
I think the Chair can call on, it's up to the Chair to recognize whoever he wants to recognize.
Mr. Chair, you've already given me the floor, so I'd like to move forward, if that's all right with you.
Go ahead.
I move that I'm going to drop an amendment, or a motion, please. I move that the committee instruct the chair to report to the House the following. The Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security call on the Minister of Public Safety to make a decision on Huawei's involvement in Canada's telecommunications network. For over 3 years, security experts, allied countries, the House of Commons, and Canadians have called on your government to act on the serious national security concerns and ban Huawei from Canada's 5G infrastructure. On Tuesday, September 28th, 2021, the Prime Minister promised to make a decision in the, quote, coming weeks, end quote. The government's indecision has been exploited by Huawei, which sold Canadian telecommunication firms hundreds of millions of dollars worth of critical equipment installed in their networks. Now, these large Canadian telecom companies, are seeking over $1 billion in compensation from the taxpayer to remove and replace Huawei infrastructure from their networks. Canadian consumers already pay some of the highest monthly fees for cell phone service in the world. The committee recommends that the government reject the requests for compensation from Canada's large telecommunication companies, and that the government inform the committee of the date on which a decision will be made on Huawei before year end. And that the committee request a government response.
I'm disappointed that we have two members of the committee who were vying for the attention of the chair simultaneously, and I had no way, given the technology, of knowing who was first. So I am going to call on Ms. Damoff to tell us what she was about to say to the committee, and then we'll proceed from there.
I can't do that, Chair, because there's a motion on the floor, so I would move to adjourn debate on the motion.
And that, I believe, is not debatable, is it? So there's a movement, clerk, to adjourn debate on Ms. Dancho's motion.
So it's a dilatory motion, sir. So can I proceed with the vote?
It can't be debated, so we proceed with the vote. Go ahead.
The question is on the motion moved by Ms. Damoff.
No, actually.
Ms. Damoff moved the motion to adjourn the debate.
Yes.
Mr. Chang?
Yes.
Ms. Damoff?
Yes.
Mr. McKinnon?
Yes.
Mr. Nur Mohammed?
Yes.
Mr. Zubairi?
Yes.
Ms. Dancho?
No.
No.
Lloyd? Lloyd?
No.
Mr. Shipley?
No.
Mr. Van Popta?
No.
Madame Michaud?
Contre.
Mr. McGregor?
No.
Yeas pour 5, 5. Nays contre 6, 6.
So, clerk, that means we proceed with the debate?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Ms. Dancho has raised her hand, sir.
Ms. Dancho?
Mr. Chair, I just want to add some comments to the motion. And again, we know that this has been an issue going on in Canada for several years. It's been about 3 years since the Prime Minister has promised Canadians that he will make a decision on Huawei, and that has yet to occur. In my meetings with a number of the telecommunication companies in Canada, this is a pressing issue for them. They continue to need to evolve their infrastructure, and yet they're being held back on what decisions they can make. So just from a purely telecommunications for access for all Canadians to upgrade our network, this is impacting that. And then on the other hand, we're also seeing significant national security concerns expressed from experts across the Western world of Huawei. We are the outlier in the Five Eyes of banning Huawei from our 5G infrastructure and from infrastructure for telecommunications across Canada. We need to be leaders to ensure that our telecommunications are protected, that Canadians are protected. This is a national security issue, and it is a grave concern to opposition and opposition parties that the government is not being a leader on this, that we have Huawei technology in Canada. We even see in our international airport in Ottawa, you come down the escalator, and what's the first thing you see? The largest advertisement in the Ottawa airport is of Huawei. So there are clear indications that the Huawei company is taking advantage of the government's indecision, and we are increasingly concerned that this will threaten the longevity and the security of our telecommunications, and therefore the national security of each individual Canadian. We all own cell phones now. We are incredibly dependent on them. We must ensure we are working with companies that protect our national security, and so we do believe before we break for Christmas that we need to ensure the government is aware that opposition parties will continue to hold them to account, and we view this matter as urgent, and that is why we've brought forward this motion today.
Thank you. Other commentary? Mr. Lloyd?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I concur with this motion from my colleague. I think this is a very important and pressing issue, only more so because of the inordinate amount of delay that this government has taken on this issue. It's becoming, apparent to Canadians that this is highly unlikely that the government is still waiting on the results of some sort of national security review, and that this decision is most likely sitting with political decision makers who are just refusing to make a decision on this or refusing to announce a decision on this. And that's speculation, but, I think Canadians want to see, a path forward, and they want to see what action this government is going to be taking. And I think this motion really illustrates why it is so vitally important, because we have seen that taxpayers are possibly incurring a growing liability each and every day that the government doesn't make a decision, because we know that many Canadian telecom companies are pursuing partnerships with Huawei and using Huawei technology, and it's been reported widely in the media that we're talking about investments in the hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars in Huawei equipment. And the longer the government chooses to delay, the bigger the potential liability for Canadian taxpayers there could be if these telecom companies choose to take legal action against the government to recover the costs of their investments. And I think it's only fair to all parties involved and Canadians for the government to issue, clear direction on which direction they want to go. As it's been noted in the motion, the Prime Minister promised on September 28th that this decision would be made in coming weeks, and we've heard this story over and over and over again that a decision is going to be forthcoming, and yet no decisions are being made. And the longer that we go through with this, I mean, it's becoming quite a farce. If the government does not want to make a decision on this, then they should be clear with Canadians that they're not going to make a decision on this, so that everyone can plan accordingly. But the fact is that they do have to make a decision. It's their job. They're in government. They were elected to a minority government to make decisions on behalf of Canadians, on behalf of our national security and our telecommunications infrastructure. And so there's no more ragging the puck on this. They've got to come to a resolution to this issue for the reasons that were put forward. And we know that telecommunications costs, cell phone costs for Canadians, are amongst the highest in the G7 and amongst the highest in the world. And what we don't want to see is Canadian consumers getting penalized by the costs of the government's indecision on this matter, and these costs being passed along to consumers in regards to higher internet, broadband, higher cell phone bills. So let's, I think it's very appropriate of this committee to call on the Minister of Public Safety to, we're not even necessarily calling on the Minister of Public Safety to make a decision before the year end, but we're calling on him to tell Canadians when a decision will be made, which I think is entirely reasonable for this committee to ask. I think we've given plenty of leeway to this government to review the facts. We've had several elections where the government can, talk to their constituents, talk to Canadians about their concerns with this issue. And so I think it's time for a resolution. And if this committee needs to be the one that pushes that first domino over, then I think let it be this committee that does it. So I support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Lloyd, I'm sorry, but you'll have to put your mask on. Other commentary?
Mr. McGregor, sir, raised his hand first.
Sorry, Mr.
McGregor.
Point of order.
Mr. McGregor, go ahead.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I just wondered, your comment, please put my mask back on. Is it the practice of this committee that when members are engaged in speaking and drinking a glass of water that they are still required to wear their masks, Mr. Chair?
No. No.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just speaking briefly in support of this. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I couldn't vote to adjourn debate. I think one of the important roles of a legislative committee is that oversight function over the executive branch, and I believe for too long we have been awaiting a sense of direction from the government on this. It has consumed the media for a number of years. Many people in Canada just are not sure why we continue to have a delay on this. So I definitely support, as a part of our oversight functions of the executive branch, that this committee take a firm stand and to send this letter to the minister. So I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Other comments? Hands up? I see a hand up, but I don't know whose it is. We'll have to figure out this technical glitch for next time.
Je peux y aller,
Madame
Monsieur le
Michaud,
Président?
sir, first.
Madame Michaud?
Merci.
Is it you?
Merci.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Dancho, for this motion. I completely agree, and I also completely agree with what Mr. McGregor just stated. It's more than time for the government to make a decision and that it informs the House. We've been asking for this for over a year, so I am for this motion. Thank you.
Other comments? Hands up?
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too want to speak in favor of this motion. It's high time that Canada makes a decision on this very, very important question. As has been noted already, we are the outlier in with our closest allies, the Five Eyes. It is high time that we make a decision. The market hates uncertainty, and that's what this government's dithering on this issue is doing. It's bringing uncertainty into the marketplace. Investment dollars are sitting on the sidelines, wondering where it should go. Which technology is Canada going to follow? And I think that it would seem obvious, at least to the casual observer, that we should be working together with our Five Eyes allies, making the right decision, making that same decision. But more importantly, a decision has to be made so that the market going forward knows where we need to go. This is certainly, it's a competitive world that we live in, and certainly it is in the high-tech industries. I think that we just need to get on with it so that Canada can remain competitive, so that we can keep growing our economy, creating good jobs for people, and that our investment dollars know where to land, where to invest. Certainly a public safety issue, national security. I would really urge the government to step forward, make that decision, and an encouraging word from this committee, I think, would go a long ways to encourage the Prime Minister and his cabinet to go ahead and make that decision finally. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from members of committee? Clerk?
Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Mr. Noor Mohammed, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I think certainly many of us are confident that the government is not only going to review, but to not only in the process of review, will make the appropriate decision. I think it's important, given the comments that have been made today, to just reflect on how we ended up having to have this conversation in the first place. And, before some of us were here in 2012, if I remember correctly, it was Prime Minister Harper that was talking about what an important and what an honor it was for him to preside over the signing of the agreement that Huawei had formed with TELUS, and indeed which was in some sense the precursor that has put us in the situation where we are today. And so, as we seek to work together on these things, ascribing blame to the government of the day to try and sort of expedite a decision and to just make the decision right away, it belies the need to think about why we ended up where we are and the importance of really realizing that there have been so many close contacts, close relationships, close sort of supports that have come from the Conservative Party with Huawei over the course of the last number of years. And so I'm glad that there are so many of us now that agree that it is important to have an appropriate review done, an appropriate process done. But due process is important, and making sure that the government makes that decision in a way that protects the interests of Canadians, as it has always done, and takes into consideration and account the information that our intelligence agencies provide, which it always does, is the right approach. And this is one of those things where I think Canada's national security is going to be, the decisions are going to be made by the people that know it best, and I think that we should be confident in that.
Other comments from members of the committee?
Ms. Dancho.
Ms. Damoff.
Who's before me? Yeah.
Ms. Damoff?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Whoops. Sorry, this mask and earphone thing and everything else. I don't think we should be supporting this motion. I think we're dealing with national security issues and the development of the 5G network in Canada, and I think that the national security agencies need to be involved. I recognize other countries have made decisions on 5G. We're taking that into account. I do trust that the minister and the government are taking all of these things into consideration, and I think the motion, it's asking for us to encourage the minister to make a decision, but I know that the government is seized with this and is looking at it, and to make assumptions, as my colleague across the way did, about why things are happening and that it's just sitting on a desk is unfair and leads to Canadians thinking that we are not taking their safety seriously, and we do. And as a government, we don't rush when it comes to the safety of Canadians, nor should we. So I think it's very important that the government take the time. They've made statements on when this decision will be coming. And I mean, if the telecom companies have invested in something, that's a corporate business decision. I don't think it's something that we should be getting into here at the committee. And I think I think that we should be considering this in the perspective of national security and ensuring that Canadians have confidence in the government, that we've reviewed all of the issues before us, and that we're that we are moving forward in a responsible way. Thank you.
Other members of the committee with commentary? Is that Ms. Dancho?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Dancho, yeah.
Yeah, I just do believe that this is the Public Safety Committee of Canada is a long-standing committee, and its responsibility of many, but is to ensure the public safety of Canadians. And we do believe that this is a national security issue. So this is well within the scope of this committee, and I do believe it is a duty of ours to indicate to the government that it has been enough waiting. It is time for a decision. Canadians want a decision. They've been promised a decision. The telecommunications companies would like a decision. Again, this government has been in power for 6 years, and they have been promising this for 3. Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and the US have all moved forward in the last number of years and made decisions. There is no reason that we cannot do the same for Canadians. And so, again, I think that this Liberal government has sort of been marked with indecision and blaming former governments, but ultimately the decision remains with them. They promised to deliver it, and I do believe it is the duty of the Public Safety Committee of Canada to ensure the safety of Canadians. That includes our telecommunications security. Thank you.
Other comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair. If I'd like to be recognized.
Yes.
So I really think this is a good discussion, an important one to have. And myself, I've been hearing a lot about Huawei and have some concern around it also. I do though at the same time, we've seen our security agencies protect Canadians. I have full confidence that they will do so, especially on this very important matter of domestic security. I also recognize how this is a somewhat of a complex issue. It involves both domestic security and involves some level of international relations. And we have seen clear signals from the government saying that there will be a decision that's imminent and forthcoming. We all know that this question has been out there for a while, but the language around the timing of this decision is whittling down. And for that reason, I trust that that decision is around the corner. And for this reason, I won't be supporting this motion here brought on by our colleague. But just want to go on the record on that point. Thank you.
Other comments? We are colleagues within a minute or so of our prescribed end time. Is there another comment from a member of the committee? Well, do we have a majority to adjourn the meeting?
Mr. Chair, there are hands up for discussion.
I don't see hands up. Okay. Mr. McKinnon, is that you?
Mr. Chang.
Mr. Chang. Hello, Mr. Chang. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a former police officer, I like the committee to be focusing on the gangs and crime and the gun violence in our country. It is very important for us to focus on that because of the gang violence, and we need to work on that instead of looking at the Huawei, which our government is doing a study on that, and they will be working on that component. So I would vote against that. Thank you.
Thank you. Other commentary? I see the time is 1 o'clock, except in Bomberland where it's noon. So, do we have a sense of the meeting to adjourn?
No.
Can we adjourn the meeting, clerk?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Dancho.
Mr. Chair, we don't give our consent to adjourn, but I know the Liberal members have already sort of put on the record that they're not supporting the motion, so I suggest that we vote on the motion then. Many of them have already expressed that they won't be supporting it, so let's vote is my recommendation, Mr. Chair. And then we're free to adjourn from our perspective.
Clerk, where do we proceed from here? Do we move to a motion to adjourn?
As long as there's speakers, sir, we need to keep going. Mr. McKinnon and Mr. Damoff.
Yes, Mr. Clerk. I move that we do now adjourn.
Can I proceed with the vote, sir?
You may.
The question is on the motion moved by Mr. McKinnon. Mr. Chang?
I move.
Stammer?
Yes.
Mr. McKinnon?
Yes.
Mr. Noor Mohammed?
Yes.
Mr. Zubairi?
Abstain.
Who's that? He abstained?
Ms. Tancho?
No, against adjournment.
No.
Guy just screwed them.
Mr. Shipley?
No.
Mr. Van Botta?
No.
Madame Michaud?
Contre.
Mr. McGregor?
For adjournment, yes.
Like, Mr. Chair, I'd like to. I misunderstood what we were voting on. If I can just correct, I'm voting to adjourn. In favor of adjournment.
Yeah, I think that was clear.
Thank you. So I'd just like to correct it. I'm correcting it.
No, but he said that was clear.
Mr. Chair, if I just may, a point of clarification, if I may.
Go ahead.
I'm not clear. So, Mr. Zubairi, I'm sorry, did I pronounce that correctly? Mr. Zubairi, you weren't aware that we were voting to adjourn, or?
You're right. I am voting. I wasn't aware of that. I thought we were voting on something else, and I'm voting in favor of adjourning.
Okay. We could press the issue, but we'll let this go this time. All right.
I think I have the right to, but we'll let it go.
Again.
We'll let it go.
I think that, Ms. Dancho, I think that's very gracious of you. Let's move on from there.
It was all part of a plan.
Can we continue with the vote, please?
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Do you have the results, or are there more members to poll?
Yeah.
Sorry, clerk, I'm awaiting your tally here.
Yes, sir. So we have yeas pour 6, nays contre 5, 5.
So we are adjourned. Members, I'd like to thank you all very much for the spirit of cooperation. I think we did some very important work. Everybody, including me, doing things for the first time. The hands will become surer as we proceed with committee meetings. But I am very grateful for the spirit of cooperation that was evident this morning. And I look forward to seeing everybody just 46 hours from now. Thank you, everybody. Meeting is adjourned. Here's my gavel. Meeting adjourned.